Dan Mandis here. I want to welcome on into the program from Las Vegas, Nevada. Matthew Hurtt is joining us. He's hanging out with the Republicans, the RNC in Las Vegas. I'm sure, Matthew, that is a raucous gathering out there in Las Vegas.
Dan, the Republican National Committee, the governing body of the National Republican Party, meets 3 times a year. This is the winter meeting. It's in the Paris Hotel in Las Vegas, and I'm here as the regions across the country gather for a regional breakfast. This is where the southern representatives of the Republican Party will gather together and have grits and bacon and eggs and talk about important issues as we head into this election cycle and as we head toward the convention in Milwaukee later this summer.
So one of the things that I've noticed, I'm just going to spitball a bunch of questions to you because I haven't written anything down, but I saw that Ronna McDaniel, she is once again under fire for this out-of-control spending. But from what I can tell, there's no new allegations of too much spending, extravagant spending. These are, seems to me like based on a story from last year. Is there any word that the RNC, or I should say Ronna McDaniel, has curtailed that extravagant spending that she was accused of last year?
The reports have continued to come out ahead of this meeting. Last week there was another financial disclosure, but I think the really confusing and curious part for rank-and-file Republicans or people who want Republican candidates to be well-funded is the spending in conjunction with this request for a $10 million line of credit. The fundraising cycle comes in natural waves, and at this part of the year, political parties don't tend to raise as much money as they do as they head into the summer and into the election. But it's really concerning, and that's been the major talk of most of the Republican National Committee members this week is what's going on with this line of credit and what's going on with the fundraising.
Well, let's back up a little bit because I don't want to gloss over that. So I'm assuming, because I'm not involved in politics and all that, I don't get involved in the parties, but is that normal to ask for a $10 million line of credit?
It has happened in the past, but this is an issue where, coupled with all of the other elements of this story, the extravagant spending on limousines and on floral arrangements and alcohol, and the fundraising from Donald Trump as we head into the nomination and where some of those expenses are going, this is all part of a narrative that would cause rank-and-file Republicans to wonder about the management of the National Republican Party. And we have to put our budget in order in our homes, and what is the party doing? The members meet, they met on Wednesday morning for a members-only closed-door breakfast, and 85% of the discussion during that breakfast was about this line of credit, and is it responsible for the Republican Party to borrow this much money?
It doesn't, to me, it doesn't feel like it, especially when you look at the Democrats. And there's a story I had a couple of days ago. Biden's super PAC is spending $250 million on an ad campaign. Let me ask this, is when you have the RNC and they're going to perhaps borrow $10 million, is that for campaigns? Is that for just running the party? What would that money be used for, do you know?
If that money is borrowed at this point in the cycle, it's very likely payroll for staff, digital ads, and some of that. What you don't see at this point in the cycle is a lot of field staff or a lot of direct investment in candidates. And so it is, to be determined. But I do think that a question that was raised Wednesday morning at the members-only breakfast was how many new donors came in last year in 2023 to the RNC, and the RNC leadership couldn't answer that question. And that's very concerning. I've got a bit of a fundraising background, and any organization needs to know, how many donors they have, what the average gift is, and when you can expect that donor to give again, so that you can model your budget and prepare for this as we head into the election.
So what's up with Ronna McDaniel? Are people going to start thinking, okay, we need to make a change?
There was some murmuring about that earlier this week. Our friends at Turning Point Action had a 2-day Restoring National Confidence conference ahead of the RNC, and the national committee man from Arizona, a guy named Tyler Boyer, is on the front lines of helping Turning Point sort of energize activists around the country on this issue, on accountability for the RNC. But after about Wednesday morning, the murmuring about changing the chairman really kind of died down. I don't think that we're going to see that this morning in about 3 hours. We've got a general session. So this is where the RNC's committees will report out, and they will, the members will approve all of the business. But I don't think we're going to see anything particularly contentious, especially since the members-only breakfast from Wednesday morning, 85% of the discussion was about the line of credit and not about Ronna McDaniel.
All right, so moving on to other things, I did mention Matthew Hurtt joining us, by the way, Grassroots political analyst for Super Talk 99.7 and Nashville's Morning News. Biden's Super PAC plans a $250 million ad campaign. This is a record. And this is one of those, slimy, greasy, in my opinion, suspicious super PACs. They call it dark money. You've got all of these, hedge fund billionaires that are donating to this thing. That is a record, $250 million. And, there have been reports that Donald Trump is, number one, these are just reports. I don't know if it's true or not, but having trouble raising money, that's number one. And number two, a lot of the money that's being donated to his campaign is being eaten up by legal fees. So what's your perspective on that?
This is going to be the longest and most expensive presidential election in American history. And I want the listeners of this program to buckle up. This is going to be the longest 9 or 10 months that we have ever experienced as far as an election is concerned. We see it with Joe Biden's fundraising and what he's going to spend on. We see it with the Republican Party and the presumptive nominee, Donald Trump. So we're now in sort of a general election position right now. And we see it with the expenditures that the Republican Party and the Donald Trump campaign are having to engage in, which are concerning because every dollar that we take off the campaign trail to spend on legal fees is a dollar we can't connect with voters. And Joe Biden and the radical left are 100% going to invest in this election cycle. And they're going to do it today, and they're going to do it for the next 10 months. And Republicans and conservatives have to be able to compete with that.
Now, this is interesting. 5965 says this. People are donating directly to Trump instead of the RNC. You think there's any truth to that?
Well, the platform WinRed is the fundraising platform that the Republican Party uses, and what you frequently find is a joint fundraising committee. But none of this is secret money. It's not hidden. We can go to the FEC and see who's raising money, and what we see are expenditures for legal fees, and we see a lull in fundraising. We have seen a drop in small dollar donations that have migrated over to Donald Trump to a certain extent. But all of this is, a fundraising operation isn't built in a year, and it takes years and years to cultivate donor relationships. Even somebody who gives $5, $10, or $25, there's still a meaningful relationship that a committee or a candidate has to build with that donor. And so the Republican Party has some work to do in that regard. And I think, that is an important investment year over year, long-term building on the fundraising side.
Matthew Hurtt is joining us. So I don't want to do too much of a deep dive into the polling from earlier this week. I covered it extensively at the time. But we had a couple of polls out. One of the polls showed that Joe Biden suddenly was, I'm air quoting Matthew, surging. Suddenly he is surging, they say, and he's ahead 6 percentage points in a sort of a general election kind of a way. And also there was another poll, I think it was the very next day, where there's also this story of the polling where Donald Trump is ahead of Joe Biden in 7 of the very important battleground states out there. So you have contradictory polling, but I do also understand that there is a very important difference between those two polls.
One poll doesn't tell us much, but a series of polls tells a story. And what we've got, again, this is the beginning of February, so we have another 10 months, 9 months into this election, and voters will shift and move and check in and check out as we get to August and September and October. So what we're seeing now is the beginning of a narrative. Now, if you see the polling continue the way it is, or Joe Biden pull away and the fundraising numbers in conjunction with that, all of this tells a story, and those stories either depress voters and they don't turn out, or they enthuse and energize voters and they do turn out. So all of this, the fundraising, the poll numbers, the spending, all of that tells a story about what the voters should think about as we head into this election. And I think that's what we're seeing. Early polls aren't going to tell us much, but as we get into August and September, that stuff will kind of come into view.
Let me ask you this, because At what point do we start really paying attention to polls? Because I always say that the polls are meaningless at this point. We're, what, eight months or so ahead of the election? At what point do they really start paying attention to the polling?
Well, polling isn't really a science. It's kind of an art because, most polls are conducted by someone or a computer calling somebody on the phone. Well, how many Americans have landlines? Or, what's the average age of somebody who only has a cell phone? And what if they don't answer? Or what if they don't respond to the questions? So polling is a little bit of science and a little bit of finesse, and it's really hard to get it right. We as individuals, and this is me and maybe you and the listeners, we like confirmation bias. So polls that we like, this is just the nature of how we interact with these polls. But it's part of the headlines. So a program like this gives you something great to talk about, and people are thinking about the polls. And as more people check in and clue in and are thinking about the election, these polls will become more important. And, in 2016, every one of the listeners here remembers the New York Times had a 99% chance that Hillary Clinton was going to be the president. And, everything that night crashed and burned for Hillary Clinton, completely upending the polls and the what people thought in D.C. and in New York City. And so it's fun to watch, and it's very important that we, again, follow the story as we head into the election.
One of the things that I find interesting is, we still have Nikki Haley out there. There's a story out there today where she is saying that she is going to continue on until Super Tuesday, which is fine. It's her right. Donald Trump and his camp have been asking Nikki Haley to sort of, get out of the way and support me and all those kinds of things. And, part of what I would, if I were advising Donald Trump, which he would never ask, but I would just tell President Trump, you know what? Get on with it. Forget about Nikki Haley. She's so far behind. I don't believe that she has a chance. And I think that the former president needs to take on the current president right now, especially when we have so many issues that are important to the American people. And when you look at those issues, you can tie a direct line to issues and legislation and executive orders that Joe Biden did, that he was overturned decisions that Donald Trump made, and that has literally led to big consequences, negative consequences within our country. For example, the border. And so I guess my long-winded question is, at what point does Trump really just forget about Nikki Haley and just go straight for Joe Biden?
I don't know what Nikki Haley's end game is, but you're absolutely right. Donald Trump should be doing this like a general election race. Joe Biden is certainly doing it, and the $250 million spending is going to prove that. So, from South Carolina forward, I think Donald Trump should be speaking in general election terms. He should be reaching voters in the middle. He should be organizing principled conservatives and Republican activists and getting them to get out and knock doors. Again, this is going to be the longest presidential election in our history, the longest and most expensive. And the sooner Donald Trump starts thinking about this in general election terms, the better off conservatives and Republicans will be, because the left is going to spend and spend and spend and organize, and conservatives have to be ready.
Let me ask you, and this is a final question, and I asked this question of the audience earlier. So do you think that the focus should be on Donald Trump's accomplishments or Joe Biden's screw-ups? Because, to me, I'll tell you where I sit on this, is that I think that Joe Biden's screw-ups are so incredibly stark and so incredibly obvious and so incredibly deadly that I think that the talking points for Donald Trump just writes themselves.
I would say, why not both? And I was watching CNN yesterday, so that you don't have to, Dan. And they were interviewing people in Dearborn, Michigan, pro-Hamas, terrorist activist kind of things, and people who had organized for Joe Biden in the past. They had organized, they worked for him, they knocked doors for him, who said they weren't voting for Joe Biden now. And that is certainly a major part of, for the Democrats, a Joe Biden screw-up. So it's nice to talk about that, but it's also nice to remind voters what the economy was like, what jobs were like, what America's position on the global stage was like when Donald Trump was president. So we have to do both, And the important thing is we have to have the resources to do it. So the party has to raise the money and Donald Trump has to raise the money. And we have to have the activists to then go out and share that message with voters across the political spectrum. We can't win this with just Republican primary voters. And, we've got 9 months to do it. And I think conservatives are going to organize and fundraise and take the message to as many people as they can. And we've got a tremendous opportunity here.
Donald Trump, actually, I don't know, are you going to come out for Trump's? He's got and I don't have it in front of me, but he's got a fundraiser that's going to be in Nashville here in the next month or so. I believe that it's in March. And I don't know, do you come out for those kinds of fundraisers?
I don't really do high dollar fundraising events. I work on the back end of campaigns sometimes, so I'm usually the one.
I don't care about you. Can you get me in?
Yeah, I don't know. Well, come on out to Las Vegas later today after the program, Dan, and I'll get you into something. It'll be exciting.
Sure.
But this is, that is events in Nashville, high dollar fundraisers and low dollar fundraisers are very important for this campaign, and it shows that Donald Trump is pivoting toward a general election strategy. That's great news.
And that is good news, and I appreciate you dialing in. And Matthew, how can folks find you on Twitter?
I'm on Twitter at Matthew Hurtt, MatthewHurtt.